Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to go straight into the second segment around the fifth-year option deadline that is now behind us. It finalized yesterday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and there were a lot of surprises, a lot of decisions to be made around some pretty impactful players for some of these teams, and I went over all of them, all 32, or really 30 picks that had the option for that fifth year. And I'm just basically going to go through them and see which ones I agree with, which ones I don't agree with on this segment. And oddly enough, as you saw there on your screen, Najee Harris was one of the first ones, and I'm going to talk about him extensively because I am a Steelers fan. But also, before I do that, just some context behind the fifth-year option deadline. Of all the 32 picks in the first round for the 2021 draft pick or draft year, where the fifth-year option is eligible now, 18 of the 32 first-round draft picks had their options picked up, and it is an increase from last year's when the 2020 class was up for their fifth-year options. This year there was 18. Last year there was only 12 options picked up last year. Those included Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, Tua, Herbert, Burrow, etc. All those guys were some of the major players that had their fifth-year options picked up, and really only Burrow is the one that I mentioned that got an extension, or actually Herbert as well. Justin Jefferson, CeeDee, and Brandon Ayuk and Tua have yet to receive an extension, so time is running out on them. But this year there was that increase, and of those 18 picks that were picked up, there was 14 that weren't picked up, 12 were declined, and 2 that weren't picked up weren't actually eligible. Alex Leatherwood being one of them, picked in the first round, but because he was released and isn't actually on a team, he's not eligible to have that fifth-year option picked up. And Rashad Bateman really has to do with the years and starting, I think, one of the years on the physically unable to perform list. That affected his fifth-year option eligibility. But regardless of that, he signed an extension already, so he's going to be under contract, just no fifth-year option for him. And that's basically what it is. One thing that I will point out that I won't really go into too deep on is that Trevor Lawrence had his fifth-year option picked up as one of the 18 that did. And he's the only quarterback of the top 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round in 2021 that had their option picked up. The other 4 were not picked up by their teams, and they're not even on the teams that drafted them, all 4 of them. So that is its own story on how these quarterbacks are selected and the projections and everything like that. But that's a whole different story. I mentioned Najee Harris before. He was the last player I saw from the internet, from the sources and everything, that got his option declined. It came around 3:55 p.m. Eastern Time, right at that deadline, as the Steelers usually do, like to keep everybody on their toes. And he had a fifth-year option of $6.7 million if the Steelers were to pick it up. They decided against it. And it came at a bit of a surprise for me because of what Najee Harris has meant for this team, just following this team as a fan, and I'm sure anybody else who just follows the NFL would see that Najee, the way that the Steelers and he sort of interact, he seemed like a pretty pivotal part. You know, Mike Tomlin talks glowingly about him. He seems well respected around the organization already and within his teammates as a leader already stepping into that role. That plus on the field, he's produced 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons in his first 3 years in the league. He's the only Steeler in their history to do that in their first 3 years. And he joined some elite company if he did it this coming year for the first 4 years of his NFL career. So he's put up the numbers. He has the pedigree in the organization to pick it up. And then when the Steelers declined it, I still, again, like I mentioned, was pretty surprised by it. And it just goes into that, one, the running back market being devalued. At 6.7, even if they picked up that option, I didn't think that was too expensive to pick up, with Najee being one of your most impactful players. Plus, I think the most important thing is that 1-2 punch that they were trying to build around this whole offense with Arthur Smith, drafting these offensive linemen, really emphasizing the run game. But then you don't pick up the fifth-year option on Harris, making him eligible to be a free agent this coming year. It's a bit contradicting with what the Steelers want to do and what their actions are showing. So it comes at a bit of a surprise to me, but this could always, motivate Najee, get him to play extremely well. Then he earns another contract. But, history's not on their side. The Steelers haven't given out a second contract to a running back since 2006. And you've got players like Le'Veon Bell, James Conner as the most prominent running backs since that time. They played great for the Steelers, but unfortunately, just on this trend that keeps going, the Steelers haven't given him a second contract, and if the trend continues, this could be the last year we see of Najee Harris in a Steelers uniform up till now. But that is Najee. That is one player that didn't. The other ones were the quarterbacks, like I mentioned, and these, like I said before, aren't really too big of a surprise just because of how their careers have panned out. None of them have really stepped into that role of being the guy for their organization, so much so that they all got traded away from the teams that drafted them already, except Trevor Lawrence. Zach Wilson had a $22.4 million fifth-year option. Obviously, the Jets weren't going to pick that up. He was probably the second or third string now, with Tyrod Taylor coming in there to back up Aaron Rodgers, so that didn't make too much sense for them. He goes to the Broncos, and they don't pick it up. So will Zach Wilson now compete and maybe earn a different contract with the Broncos or maybe somewhere else now that they have Bo Nix? You'd think you'd have to play him because he is the same age as Zach Wilson, has played very well for Oregon, and now he comes in there to have this quarterback battle. Can that motivate Zach Wilson, plus the fifth-year option not getting picked up? That's a tale that we have to see play out, but that's something interesting to monitor. Trey Lance is the other, now on the Cowboys. They don't pick it up. He had almost a $25 to $23 million fifth-year option. That wasn't too much of a surprise. Justin Fields, another one for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Basically on that one-year deal, his fifth-year option would have cost $25.6. Way too expensive for the Steelers, not even having played a snap for them so far. And he's tailored in as the backup as of now, so that's an expensive price tag for a second option quarterback. Same with Mac Jones. He gets traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's probably their backup, and he might not stay too long. Also, if Trevor Lawrence stays healthy, you don't see too much of Mac playing. I'm sure he'd want to stay there because he is from that area. Of course, then the Jaguars and Mac could negotiate a longer, more cheaper long-term deal for him to just stay there and be the backup if he's content with that. But again, with him, he had a $25.6 million fifth-year option. Not too much sense there for the Jaguars to pick that up. Other notable ones that did get their options picked up were Devontae Smith. A while ago, I talked about it. They picked up his fifth-year option, and they also extended him, making it sort of a 5 to 4 year long contract extension after his fifth year is done. Great business there by the Philadelphia Eagles to lock down one of their star wide receivers for the predominant future. Not too much of a surprise there. I thought an extension would get done, and then they wouldn't have to pick up the fifth-year option, but they did both, and that's that. Then another one, which is interesting and just something to monitor, is Micah Parsons, as you see on the screen. The Cowboys did pick up his fifth-year option. It will cost them $24 million on that one-year deal, essentially. And that's something to watch because of everything that's going on with Dak and CeeDee. And CeeDee is playing now on his fifth-year option because of last year, the Cowboys picking it up. So now he will be on that fifth-year option this coming year. If no extension is hashed out, he'll be a free agent next offseason. And then next offseason, are you going to want to have Micah Parsons play on his fifth-year option without getting to an extension? It has bought you a bit more time to figure out CeeDee, but the Cowboys really have to figure these contracts and their numbers out. Plus, you also have, just your quarterback as well looking for a deal. So no real problem there for the Cowboys to figure out. Three of their most impactful players are right here at the deadline for them. I keep saying it. I think they're just bound to lose one of them, probably Dak. At this point, it doesn't seem too positive right now, but we'll have to see. But anyway, no surprise for Micah Parsons to pick up his fifth-year option at $24 million next year if he plays on it as well. And going down the line, all of these seem pretty much expected. Greg Newsome, I mentioned it on a YouTube short. He got his option picked up at pick number 26. Penei Sewell, he got a $19 million fifth-year option picked up, plus a massive extension for him with the Detroit Lions, making him one of or the highest paid lineman in the league. I think he is the highest paid lineman with that new deal. I'm 90% sure, but there could be some discrepancy there. Jamar Chase is another one with the wide receiver market. How crazy it is with Justin Jefferson and CeeDee, like I just talked about. He'll be playing on his fifth-year option next year if it gets to that without an extension. The Bengals have T. Higgins. They just signed Joe Burrow to a massive extension. Of course, they're going to want to have Jamar Chase on a huge contract, probably exceeding $31 or $32 million, just because I expect Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb to get their deals before Jamar does. He'll probably cost the Bengals anywhere between $32 to up till $35 million per year. That's a huge contract to have on your books. So how does that affect T. Higgins and Joe Burrow if you restructure their contracts, do all of that salary cap gymnastics with it? That's something that's coming up to monitor as well. And just to wrap it up here with other players that didn't get their options picked up, one that surprised me a little bit could have been Kadarius Toney. He had a $14.3 million fifth-year option with the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs, what's funny about it is that some people will say that Kadarius Toney hasn't really proven it on the field. He had that incident last year with saying stuff about not being injured, the Chiefs just not wanting to play him. It created a whole other situation off the field, and I think the Chiefs have been good to Kadarius Toney and just protecting him and supporting him and stuff like that. It doesn't come at a huge surprise, but just the way that the Chiefs have been treating him, I just thought they'd pick it up. But I could see why they didn't, and now he'll be on an expiring contract as well. And on the other side, Pat Surtain, he got his option picked up. No surprise there. $19.8 million for him. Close to the max. I want to say the max is $22 million or $21 million per year to the highest paid corner. So that's right there. I'm sure he'll get close to that or exceed that depending on the year that he has. But those are really most of the ones that drew most people in, that caught my eye most of all, with how their options fell and how much money they were supposed to earn and the decisions that these teams made. Some coming and more of a surprise than others. Really, no one surprised me more than Najee Harris. He'll be certainly the one I pay the most attention to on how this all plays out because of how the Steelers have talked about their running game, that 1-2 punch he has with Jaylen Warren. If it all works out perfectly in this perfect world for the Steelers and both of them have great years, their offense is looking great, maybe he becomes the first running back since 2006 for the Steelers to get a second contract. I would certainly be a fan of it, but it all depends on the Steelers and how these young players they have on offense, Arthur Smith coming in as their offensive coordinator, all sort of gel together, not to mention 2 new quarterbacks in there. A lot of ifs, buts, and maybes with the Steelers and Najee on an expiring deal. Something to keep an eye on for sure, but we're just going to have to see how it plays out. And that'll be that for the fifth-year option players, and that'll be that for this segment. A lot more coming up on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I mentioned before the return of Ezekiel Elliott to the Cowboys and how this time it might look a little bit different than his first 5 seasons there in Dallas. Plus, we're going to talk about Jason Kelce addressing the rumors of him joining ESPN and that Monday Night Football Countdown crew. Those 2 stories are coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.